This new direction would
really have a revolutionary effect as they start to use the science as a very powerful tool. The ethnology department, founded by Powell, was first seen as the science of man, exploring the origin and evolution of man, along with the origin of the American Indian. As science historian John Haller states, the ethnologist of the 19th century thus walked an unstable course between science and assumptions. Ethnology became the means through which both scientists and social scientists sought to estimate the relative value of the races and to justify dynamic race legislation, providing a justification needed to not give the Indians the rights under a constitutional law. In 1880, Powell, as director of the Bureau of American Ethnology, began the task of debunking the honored authors, Squire and Davis, to overthrow the ideas as to the origin of this lost race theory that was floating around. Cyrus Thomas, the man who reported to the Bureau of Ethnology in 1894, became known as the final and last word as to the origin of the mound builders, bringing about a swift stop to virtually all major explorations of the mound sites of the Hopewell and Adena cultures, doing away with the thought of a lost race, giving the Indians credit for building the mounds, but not giving them credit for their great cultural achievements, in every way trying to make the Indians and these ancient cultures appear as savages, primitive cultures. For if they appear as savages, then perhaps you don't have to give them rights under a constitutional law. After all, they're only savages. So you can gather them up and put them on reservations. And so really changing how we evaluate the Indians. I mean, you hardly see a picture of an Indian that's not running around in a loincloth, carrying a tomahawk, looking for a scalp. I mean, that is how they're depicted, even in the cold countries of the North. One of Powell's biographers would state that the man that in fact understood it was the one-armed little man with a bristly beard, a homemade education, and an intense concentration of purpose. When he assumed the joint dictatorship of two bureaus which he had created, Powell controlled a good part of the science of man and the science of the earth, and he conceived both in the broadest possible terms. Now, John Wesley Powell was inspired by the writings of Morgan on the stages of human evolution and would realize that he could use these evolutionary concepts as a tool to create social reform. Powell's conviction that every variant could be placed somewhere on this evolutionary stairway gave direction and system to Powell's work in ethnology, unquote. Now, if you look at this just quickly, okay, as we view the evolution of the origin of man, really gives the foundational base on how we view and value about everything in society, how we view God's role in the organization found in nature, how we view the origin of the Indians, how we view land rights in this country, how we view the evolution of the races, how we view marriage, children, family, and it has been used for almost every progressive agenda because it's so basic and foundational. That is why understanding and why we are given an understanding of the original premise upon which God created this world and the foundational basis upon which it built comes back to how we view the origin of man. Emerging from these evolutionary stairways would be the enthronement of Darwinism, creating a new social vision for society as they would begin to view the origin of man and the origin of society through the lenses of evolutionary thought, changing how society views and values the Indians, mounds, building cultures, children, marriage, family, and the list goes on. As biographer Donald Wooster, one of Powell's biographers, would give this insight. Powell's life is also a story of the rising influence of the natural sciences, of rationalism contesting the faith of traditional religion, and of a new nationalism and secularism taking its place. As he was coming of age, science was rising to the influence in the study of nature and culture, and even the making of laws. In science, okay, get that, okay? In his day, science meant above all geology, evolution, and Darwinism. The contest of those ideas with what is now called religious fundamentalism for the supremacy of the American mind is mirrored in Powell as nowhere else. Okay? What is this about? The supremacy of the human mind in indoctrinating even our children today with these same ideas. Powell would state that social problems are so complex that few are willing and able to comprehend all the factors. And so the people are divided into two great parties, one crying for the blood, demanding the destruction of the Indians, and the other begging that they might be left in their aboriginal condition and that the progress of civilization may be stayed. Whether we desire it or not, the ancient inhabitants of this country must be lost, said Powell. And we may comfort ourselves in the reflection that they are not destroyed, but are gradually absorbed to become part of a more civilized community. These men believed that these evolutionary sciences were the way to greater insight, providing emancipation from traditional family beliefs and religious dogmas, as they would look to create a new social vision for the whole and a whole new morality for society. To accomplish such tasks, they knew that it would take the galvanizing of academic and scientific communities, such an undertaking as Morgan and Powell learned, that it would take the creation and establishment of credible organizations, societies, and social clubs. In fact, Powell organized many along with Morgan. As stated, he, John Wesley Powell, further saw that the results of this interaction would ramify onward for generations and would have a profound consequence for the land and American society. The profound consequences are many for us today. For if you want to really advance even in the sciences or the academic community today, you soon find and realize that it is absolutely taboo to talk about creationism or intelligent design. Just the idea that there was any kind of intelligent design involved in the organization found in nature is absolutely taboo. You can't even go there, let alone saying that there was other people here before Columbus. Or any of that point, okay, that God really had a hand in the organization of nature. The enthronement of these evolutionary thoughts into the origin of man has brought about major societal vicissitudes, as it has changed many widely held religious and traditional historical perspectives. One perspective is how we view the Constitution of the United States. In America's founding documents are declarations rooted in natural law, which form the foundational beginnings of America's liberties. These foundational declarations enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are based on the belief that rights are granted by man, not by man. I want you to, I got you on your toes. The beliefs that rights are not granted by man, but are endowed by our Creator. And so foundationally, okay, how we view the origin of man is how we really view the Constitution of the United States. These immutable laws have interwoven into them a belief that they were inspired by God, with the thought that children are divine, that marriage is ordained of God, and the natural family is an eternal creation of God. They view it in a totally different way. They don't see children as touched by the finger of God, the divine creatures. No, they're just another animal in the animal kingdom. They don't see marriage as ordained of God. No, it's just traditional, so it can be set aside at any whim. And so they view the family. While doing research in upstate New York, I found a book authored by Frederick Engels, a man who co-authored with Karl Marx the Communist Manifesto. I opened this book at this old and rare bookstore, and it opened this book in the very cover. It stated, it said, in light of the researches of Lewis Henry Morgan. Now, Engels, in his book, would go on to insist that the family was a human creation, a vigorous institution that must be done away with. He would go on to say of Morgan that he reconstructed the form of the family and thereby opened up a new path of investigations, a more far-reaching retrospect in the prehistory of mankind. By reaching back into the prehistory, into the origin of man, you can change this. And so these men who wrote the Communist Manifesto was inspired by Morgan. And as they viewed these origins of these mound builders and looking at the origin of man. In the winter of 1880 to 1881, Karl Marx drew up with great care over 100 pages of excerpts from Morgan's book, Ancient Society. Excerpts used by Ingalls in his book, The Origin of the Family. Now, following the introduction of the screening of the documentary, The Lost Civilizations of North America, I had a conversation with a woman who identified herself of Indian descent. To paraphrase her comments, she referenced the fact that the Indian people have been led to believe that they are a people without a history. In fact, their ancient history has been labeled prehistory, as if there is no recorded record of this people's existence. She went on to emphasize that for the sake of her children, they needed to gain a greater knowledge and appreciation of their identity, heritage, and the richness of their history. In summary, let me just say that this is a larger history that is laden with implications for our day. As foundational theories looking into the origin of the mound builders and the evolution of man became the foundational footings used to advance manifest destiny, communism, and social Darwinism to our culture today. In closing, let me just say, there are those who would seek to close the history books of man's experiences. History that shows weakness, shortcomings, and prejudices, and man's inhumanity to man. In the pursuit of a better world, if these past histories are lost and forgotten, then we may be destined to repeat some of the great and grossest failures and atrocities of the past. It is my hope and my prayer that we will not allow this to happen, that these ancient voices from the dust will once again be heard. Thank you.